Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming today. It's a pleasure to introduce Mike Steger, who is over from Colorado State University. Mike has already talked to us here on MAP earlier this week on meaning at work, but today we're going to be talking about meaning in life and health, better life, longer life. I don't know what this is. It's okay. So Mike specializes in the area of meaning. He has a laboratory at his school. So I'm going to introduce you to Mike now, who will be talking for the next 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have open time for questions.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and welcoming me into your midst. It's been here since Saturday and had a lot of fun. I recognize some folks here by now, and some folks I know by reputation and are pleased to meet and have met recently. So I'm just going to kind of jump in. I changed the title of the talk just a little bit. So instead of meaning in life and health or something else, it's meaning in life and health, better life, longer life. So this is a question. We're just going to start emerging as much as we can into understanding what we need to do to answer such a question and how close have we come so far. So this is a starry night. It's getting a little bit washed out by the lighting, but I'll try to block it. But stars at night. This is really the beginning of my research question. So if we take a look at where we are in the grand scheme of all history, all that's ever happened, our period of time where we're breathing and conscious of what's happening to us is almost infinitesimally small when you compare it to anything else. When you compare it to the cosmos, when you compare it to the life on planet Earth, we even compare it to the earliest Homo sapiens. We have just the briefest snap of a moment with our lives. And that can be very scary for some people. I think some people would prefer never to think about such things. But for me, I'm just constantly drawn to the question of why. Why do something in a world where you have such a brief moment to contribute or to even understand what you're trying to do? So I think at the heart of this question is, what is life supposed to mean for me? What's the meaning of life? How can I matter? And what can I do with my life? And I think that oftentimes we don't necessarily confront this question in the most productive way. Like, in fact, I feel like sometimes we don't take advantage of what we've been given. So what I like about this also is there's someone from the 1950s, as if that's so old, like you can't imagine someone from the 1950s, but I've heard they still exist. If someone from the 1950s suddenly appeared today, what would be the most difficult thing to explain to them about life today? I possess a device in my pocket that is capable of accessing the entirety of information known to man. I use it to look at pictures of cats and get in arguments with strangers. In this brief little glimpse, I mean, who's looked up something of ultimate truth about cosmos and life today on their smartphones? I found a pub. I used it to find a pub today, but beyond that, we don't take advantage of the full resources we have, which is fine. But if we can occasionally take advantage of the resources we have, I think we've got a better bet of living a meaningful life, hopefully a healthier life and a longer life. So today we'll just talk a little bit about what meaning in life really is, particularly from the psychological standpoint. That's only one perspective on this question. Talk a little bit about meaning in life and health, address some of the limitations of some of that research to a small degree with study one. Then we'll talk about why would meaning in health be linked at all to the degree that we can show that they are. And then we'll take a look at this study two, start to offer some ways of answering this question or asking this question in a different way. So here's our theory part. This is the very serious part. We've got brilliant people talking about brilliant things, starting with the person who really inspired me to do this work, Viktor Frankl. And he more or less was building on Nietzsche, which is kind of an ironic thing because part of what he faced in his life and part of the devastation that was wrought on pretty much everyone he held dear, also those people also drew some inspiration from Nietzsche, and that was in Nazi Germany, the idea that some people are just destined to be better than others. Frankl didn't draw on that idea. He felt like everyone is equally noble, and in particular he thought that people have a purpose that they can live for. If I have a why, I can get through any how. This is one paraphrasing of Nietzsche that he seemed drawn to. And that which does not kill me makes me stronger. Now I talk to students all the time. Mostly I'm teaching undergraduates, and if you ask, do you have a sense of what life's all about, they have some sort of phrase, oftentimes tattooed on their arm somewhere, or in like some Japanese kanji somewhere, some motto that's going to get them through life. That which does not kill me makes me stronger, and if I have a purpose in life, I can get through anything. What if you had to live, what you really had to put that on the line? He did. He was taken, as he was developing this manuscript, by Nazi German soldiers. separated from his family, and he never saw a single member of his family again. Every single one perished in the concentration camps. That's tough, right? He still came through thinking what he saw as the difference between people who perished and people who survived was meaning and purpose. Everyone was hurt. Everyone was starved. Everyone was freezing. Everyone was deprived of the things most important to them. And some people lived and some people died, and he felt it was purpose. So that's really the inspirational root of almost everyone who does this kind of research on meaning. How can we find some sort of psychological resource that can get through the most inhumane and terrifying times and be used to hopefully prevent those terrifying times from reappearing? So Frankl argued that you could have meaning by creating something that didn't exist before, whether it's your own twist on things or something totally novel. By relating to other people, that relationships are a way for meaning to take life and enduring through suffering. We don't get to choose whether we suffer, but to some degree or other, we can choose how we are going to perceive that suffering in our own lives, and we can serve as an example to others, which he, of course, continued to do for 30, 40 years after his book came out. Then we have Salvatore Amati, who now is more famous for talking about hardiness, this idea that we can have an attitude that helps us get through difficult times again. So you see this, the early roots of meaning in life are so different than the early roots of positive psychology. It's in suffering, it's in overcoming, it's in persevering, it's in the idea that important things can come out of difficult times. And so that's part of the appeal to me as well. But you talked about the idea that seeking and pursuing purpose is important. Maybe it's not just the fact that we know we're here for some fantastic reason, but maybe we can be okay with uncertainty about why we really are here and see that as a healthy part of being a human. We move into fully psychological theories in the 1970s, and we proceed through the 1990s with this idea that we can understand our lives. So we start to see the roots of a cognitive approach to meaning in life, sense-making, mental maps, superordinate schemas, however you want to call it. This idea that meaning in life consists of our ability to understand our place in the universe and pursuing important goals. Well, if we extend that into the future, we get something like a life purpose. And then finally feeling fulfilled. This is tough to say because doing any sort of research that has an emotional component is difficult. So we're leaving this to the side now. We'll shift this from an emotional component to an evaluative component, as you'll see later. Finally, Baumeister wrote the book on meaning in life, as he did write the book on fill in the blank, anything having to do with psychology or sociology. What Baumeister has written the book on, so if he hasn't done it in your field yet, just wait, about 5 years probably. So he distilled a completely different meaning. No psychological study on meaning really found his way into his book. He looked at different literature and said that across humanity, 4 things need to happen in order to give us a sense of meaning. Meaning is really just a sense of connection and relationship. No single item of information can have meaning unless we understand its network of associations with other bits of information. So meaning comes from the relationship between otherwise independent objects. It's what links things together. It's the glue. So if you satisfy these 4 needs, purpose, value, which is giving us our sense of justification for whether we act or don't act, efficacy, which is, you'll know from almost all the social cognitive and social psychological research, is important to feel like you can accomplish aims, and self-worth. So this is really the backdrop, and when we start to take a different kind of look at how do we study meaning in life, where should we look to facilitate meaning, and how do we begin to measure it in an effective way. I think where the field stands right now is pretty clear on number 1 and number 3, and I believe that number 2 is beginning to take a little bit more importance in the theoretical literature, and hopefully soon in the empirical literature. Coherence, you need to make sense of life. How can your life mean anything if you don't understand anything that ever happens to you? Significance, the need to have a life that matters. And this is the evaluative framing then. Instead of an emotional frame, what we have is my life worthy, valuable, or is it worthless and valueless? And people would argue that how can your life have meaning if you think your life is worthless, not worth living? And finally, purpose, the need to do something worthy with our time here. We only have one crack at life in this body, with these people around us. Let's do something worthy with that time. We'll start with coherence, need to make sense. My particular take on this is that all of the convoluted apparatus, that napkin-thin sheet of neurons on the cortex of our skulls evolved to really crunch lots of social information and other things. But really it works hard to try to figure out what other people intend, what their mental world is like, because it helps us facilitate and build teams. What is this person experiencing right now? would you guess? Someone say something loud. Joy. Raise your hand if you agree. It's not fury, anger. This person's not about to attack you. This is a good time to ask this person for money. Right? We learn a lot when we can really begin to crunch the data about other people. But what happens when you have all that excess brain power and then lightning strikes and burns down the hut next to you? Or the crop fails? Or the sun burns so long and so hot that you experience drought? Isn't it possible you begin to take that same apparatus that understands intention and internal state in another person to the universe itself? Could you begin to have, in a sense, a theory of mind about the cosmos? So I think in some ways that's what's happening. We have this amazing data crunching mind, and it's going to crunch data about things maybe it didn't necessarily evolve to crunch data about. So I think that's really cool. It means that all the time we're making sense of our experience. One way or the other, we're always making meaning. In fact, maybe we can't even help it. What is this? Some guy named Picasso drew 4 lines. So what? What is it? What do you see? Does anyone see nothing? Does anyone see nothing? Who's going to say, I don't see anything?
It's a bottom.
It's a bottom. Someone said butt cheeks the other day in a talk I was giving. So it's a bottom, right? So can anyone unsee the bottom right now? Can you unsee? You don't see the bottom? So if I start doing something like that, does it make anyone uncomfortable? There's a whole network of associations that come along with a picture like this, right? We're probably not supposed to be talking about bottoms in the talk about meaning in life. But all the associations we have about bottoms come up to us, making we realize this chair isn't as comfortable as I thought. I'm thinking about my own bottom. Maybe you're thinking about your neighbor's bottom. Maybe you're thinking about some idealized bottom, like, oh, that reminds me of that bottom I saw the other day. Who knows? But it's not going to stop there. You're going to keep making meaning, making sense of everything that goes on around you. We know that that works a lot, or else there wouldn't be anything called advertising, branding, or language. So all these things where we deal with abstractions could be using the same process as meaning. Now, significance. Usually I ask this quiz. I've had one person once know who invented the telephones. Now I just give the answers. But did you know that the mobile phone was essentially invented by Martin Cooper? No. Did you know that the television, all the main patents for what TV technology has been, were owned by Philo T. Farnsworth? Have TVs or phones made any difference to your life? Yeah, so people make contributions, and one way of determining whether we matter is whether people benefit from our contributions, regardless of whether we're famous for them anymore or not. Some people are famous for terrible deeds, but some people are famous, or sometimes even anonymous, for things that they do that make a positive impact on the world. We have various anonymous donors, good Samaritans, people who just seem to do something good and don't expect a whole parade for it, don't expect to win a medal of some sort. There are millions of ways we can make a difference and make our lives feel like they matter, because mattering is really going to be about impact on other people. And finally, purpose, the need to do. This is my cat. No, it's not my cat. But it could be an American cat, right? So this is like the American idea of the good life. You've got your chips, this is terrible beer. We've got some sort of beer, you've got your remote control, so you don't even have to get up and fiddle with anything anymore. Some people have it on their tablets now, the remote controls for the TVs, they don't even have to figure out where the remote control is. We need to be doing, though. I think we can tell that a life without challenge, a sedentary life, is not particularly healthy for us. In fact, if you look at the 10 leading causes of death in the United States, about 9 of them are self-inflicted by lifestyle factors. So that's a lot. The reason we're dying nowadays is because we're choosing to live in a way that makes it more likely that we'll die. So a lot of those are related to not being active enough, not taking care of our nutrition enough, not having anything really to do in our lives. We just feel like we're spinning our wheels. Purpose needs to be something bigger than just sitting around doing nothing. So here I've listed a bunch of these different goal constructs that have appeared in the literature. From the briefest goal listers implementation intentions, I have an intention to do something. I have an intention to somehow sit through this whole talk. I have an intention to get to the train on time, whatever it is. It's just something you want to do. And you keep it in your consciousness, and you want to figure out a plan for making it happen. That's pretty short. You can have something that's a little bit longer term, a goal. For instance, running a successful meeting, having a successful talk. It's going to be done. You kind of have a sense of how to build towards it, but it's time limited. Then we have Brian Littles and other folks, Eric Klinger, also developed this notion of personal projects, that we can have things that we're trying to accomplish. They don't happen in a week. Maybe they happen over a course of a year or two, but it's something we're really building towards. If you've ever decided that you want to publish an empirical manuscript, you know that there's a long lead time before you get that completely anticlimactic notion that your manuscript has been accepted. Congratulations, the person who's going to irritate you with proof correction is going to notify you in a little while, then you're going to get lost in the electronic manuscript submission software system, and eventually you'll forget that you published it. But it was a personal project, and it has a beginning and an end. And then eventually you can feel good about it, hopefully. Nancy Cantor came up with the idea of life tasks, that oftentimes we have overlapping, broader things that in a particular phase of our life we're going to try and accomplish something. Maybe it's trying to learn how to become a great parent, which will come naturally to you, Kate, I'm sure. Or it's going to be getting through graduate school and establishing some sort of career afterwards. Whatever it is, it's going to take longer, but it's going to have an end to it as well. When we take a look at these last three, one of the key factors is that these, to be successful and to really feed well-being, our personal projects, our life tasks, and ultimately our purposes, which are open-ended, need to also be very resonant with who we are, with our values, with our beliefs, with our personality, with our broader goals and roles in our lives. So it's okay to have intentions and goals that have nothing to do with what we care about in life, but as we get to longer-term commitments of our effort, the research suggests that we really need those to be in harmony with who we are. So in the end, what we want is a life purpose that harnesses the best parts of ourselves towards something that we continually can work for. We're not going to accomplish it, becoming a better person all the time, helping stamp out hunger, helping eradicate injustice. Those things, they're not going to be done. They're not going to be done. If you ever feel like you finished, someone will come along and mess it up for you, right? So they're long-term things that we can really feel good about, that give our life structure. And then from there, all these other types of goals and intentions and projects and behaviors can be supported by the architecture of purpose. So those are the three pieces: coherence or comprehension, significance or mattering, and purpose, the need to do something worthy. I forgot I had that. Okay, this just says it's supposed to be more personally relevant as we get into the longer term projects that we have. And ideally there's a lot of harmony between our goal, outcomes, and who we are. Little Venn diagram. So now we can transition to meaning and health. We know what meaning is. We typically measure it by asking people if their life is meaningful. So from a theoretical standpoint, we don't always do a very good job of operationalizing meaning to fit the theory. We're continuing to develop this, but at least at the level of asking people, does your life have meaning? Does your life matter? Does your life have a purpose? Just in global terms, and leaving it up to them to say yes or no. At least 70 studies have had some sort of examined some sort of connection between meaning and health. And this is Anne Brelke's work. She's a student of Marty Seligman's at Penn, and she's actually an undergrad in Anne's lab. And they pulled together a narrative literature review. Now, a lot of different things were called meaning in this paper. We've got things like post-traumatic growth, which I think some people would argue is not synonymous with meaning. Meaning making, which really oftentimes happens in the context of stress. Global beliefs, purpose, and meaning are pretty similar though. And global beliefs are that sense that you have a master schema that you use to operate your way through life. So I'll just be focusing on some of the main findings within these two primary definitions or operationalizations of meaning. This does sound familiar, but when people study this, it's always in the context of stress and post-traumatic growth, so it's a little bit less clear. And one of the main findings that comes out is that people who say their lives are meaningful also say they're healthier. That's a correlation, so you can also say healthier people find their lives to be more meaningful. This is true in general populations all around the world, among the young and the old. It's also true among people who are dealing with specific chronic illnesses. So in populations affected by specific illnesses, you still will see that among cancer survivors, for instance, those who feel a sense of meaning feel healthier. They report better health. Among folks with Alzheimer's disease, even folks who have experienced polio in their lifetimes and are having occasional flare-ups of their symptoms. And all these folks, when they feel like their lives are meaningful, they also feel like their health is better. So there's some sort of relationship there. The problem is with this sort of research, and we'll see a few more examples as we go, is it's typically small samples, sometimes not, sometimes in the hundreds, but oftentimes fairly small, 90, 80 people. Sometimes there's specific demographic samples, such as polio survivors from the northeastern United States. That's a little specific. We want to be cautious about generalizing. Almost always they're in the Western economic powerhouses, typically England, Norway, Germany, Netherlands, Canada, US. If you got rid of those, we'd have like 8 studies, about 14 people. So, or all 3 of these things are happening at the same time. This is really what we wanted to address with study 1, and then we also see that these studies fail to examine potential mechanisms of the influence between meaning and health. So that's what study 2 is about. So we'll start with some data generated by the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Institute. Has anyone worked with those or heard what their efforts are aligned towards? Okay, they're trying to determine a different way of assessing poverty other than income, basically. So they're trying to have missing dimensions, and these include things like social trust, political representation, access to health care, feeling safe in a neighborhood, educational access. So there are, in a sense, argument if you don't have those things, you are in poverty, and that those should be the things we expect of people who are living in a relatively comfortable situation. They've taken several proposals to study meaning and health, as well as well-being, in some of the samples they do. They've done studies in Chad, in Chile, in Philippines, and a couple other countries around the world, and we're going to focus on the data from Chile. I think Chile has to be the coolest country ever. Just look at the map of Chile. This is unlike any other country. It's extremely long. It's over 2,000 miles north to south, and its thickest, which is here, it's 130 miles east to west. This is basically a gigantic noodle. It has all of the Earth's major biomes. So it has the alpine, it has the beach, it has the rainforest, it has everything. So I know that when we say, sure, we've got representative sample of Chilean households, I think this is a country that's hard to typify with one person, considering the entire population of Argentina is closer geographically than someone is from Tierra del Fuego to their countrymen in Ariza, right? So it's a big country. But we did it by Oxford Poverty and Human Development Institute, partnered with some good people there, including the Chilean Department of Health, and they got what they feel to be a representative sample of Chilean households. So this is really the first national representative sample that looks at meaning and health in a rigorous, structured way, and we were able to peer into their data. There are a bunch of different measures. We have a 3-item MLQ short form. That's a meaning and life questionnaire. I developed that as a graduate student, and it's nice to see that someone uses it. Overall health, very bad to very good, your classic subjective health measure. What's interesting about subjective health is that it's not as strongly related to objective health as you would think, but it typically predicts important health-related outcomes better than objective health. So it's this little weird conundrum. What are we really measuring? I don't know, but it predicts good things. It's not, the criteria-related validity isn't always as good as you'd hope. Satisfaction with health, income in pesos, 10-step poverty ladder. So again, there's a lot of pieces with poverty. And then other ways of looking at health, physical mobility or impairment, and then if you ever receive treatment for a variety of diseases. We're going to focus just on the health because it gets a little bit repetitive, because basically this is what you see. This magnitude, 0.15 to 0.3, small to medium effect size. This is really characteristic for relationships between meaning and health. So that's great, we got little stars, that's all very happy when you have the p-test, but when you actually think of what this means, what it means is we're not explaining a lot of health by looking at meaning. Okay. You should acknowledge that. I'm a meaning life researcher with just taking a snapshot of meaning and health. We're really probably not explaining that much. When we control for other important factors that oftentimes impact health, age, wages, where are they on the poverty ladder and on sex, we see that that number is even smaller, roughly equal to gender, roughly equal to poverty status when you discount wages, so this is going to be really subjective socioeconomic status. So again, we're explaining a very small amount of the data when we take a look at things. And I want us to be okay with that. That it's disappointing. I wish it was 0.94, right? So within the margin of measurement error, that would be my favorite, but it's not. And I think that is going to raise, hopefully, some interesting questions as we keep going through some of the other literature out there. What we can basically say here, though, is that meaning is related to a very tiny degree in a snapshot of health, particularly overall health, satisfaction with health, and health impact daily functions. So we'll assume that because that's consistent across 70 studies, somebody keeps finding the same thing. I think it's a very small effect, but we'll take a look at some of the reasons why that might exist. So first, we've got the meaning as goodness remora. Does anyone know the remora fish? Okay, well, I've got pictures of the remora fish later. Hopefully you're not the guy in the picture I'm going to show, but meaning is an outcome of health. A lot of this research is correlational. So is it that you feel healthier and then your life feels more meaningful, or vice versa? Meaning as a stress buffer has received the most theoretical attention. That is, in a sense, if you feel like your life is meaningful, the little daily hassles aren't going to stress you out as much, and you're going to be able to be more psychologically robust. Finally, this is the model I prefer to think about right now, not in refutation of the others, but as a place where we start to get some good traction, hopefully. Meaning is a reason to. Meaning is a reason to quit smoking. Meaning is a reason to go jogging. Meaning is a reason to not eat pork skins, whatever it is, right? So meaning is a reason to do something is where I think some of the research can look as well. So here's a remora fish, right? Those are the ones that stick themselves to a bigger fish so they can eat. So now if I said, look out, surfers, there's remora coming, people would think I'm crazy, right? Because the bigger deal is the shark. So if meaning is a health remora, then that means it's associated with something that really is carrying all the validity in terms of understanding health. So we need to understand if meaning really still counts when we include other important variables. This is a problem when we get really specialized in our fields, is that we think our variable is like the best variable ever, but we never compare it to other variables. So we really need multivariate, multi-level, multi-system analyses of all these sorts of processes. So this is very slow in happening in meaning. This is also a remora, so it shows that they're not particular about what they'll attach themselves to. So this is some scuba diver. She seems pretty sanguine about the fact he's got a fish vacuum packed to his back, but maybe that's just their culture, I don't know. So this is the meaning as goodness remora. There's really not a lot of research out there. We'll see one piece later on, but here's a piece from Chile. Folks who are familiar with self-determination theory would know that these are the three main psychological needs we think people have. The need to feel competent, the need to feel related and have a sense of belonging with other people, and the need for autonomy. Has anyone heard Chris Peterson's famous remark, what's the main lesson we've learned from positive psychology? Other people matter. It's a three-word phrase, but not for health. So you don't need friends, family, anybody. Just all you need is feel good and stuff. Feel like you can call your own shots and have meaning. Not really, but meaning does keep appearing with that similar effect size, drained a little bit from some of these other ones, but it's still there. So it's probably, if it's a remora, then it's a whole school of remoras rather than one giant shark explaining why meaning is related. Meaning as outcome, it is very rare to find studies where meaning is predicted down the road by any kind of health or exercise behavior. So here's one among the very old. Exercise did predict meaning 8 years later. So this is a clear arrow from improved health vis-a-vis exercise to improved meaning. Here are the ones that go the other way, though. So there's substantially more research showing that if you can improve meaning, or if you see changes in meaning at one point in time, you will eventually see changes in health at later points in time. So meaning predicts better health-related quality of life among heart failure patients, predicts slower physical decline among older adults in a few studies, and predicts less frequent heart attacks over time. So here we do see that, at least in longitudinal research, meaning is positioned in a potentially causal role, more often than meaning seems to be an outcome of health. So it's likely to go both ways, as you'll see me argue. But then we see that meaning seems to deeply predict how long you'll live. That's a good health outcome in terms of, it's pretty objective. It's not subjective health, it's objective living or death. So this makes it very attractive to economists and medical epidemiologists. This is why you see a lot of studies about mortality, because there's no arguing. You don't get to say, well, like, it's just self-reported death. Maybe it was sunny that day, so they report they're alive, and it was cloudy later, so they report they're dead. This is really actual death. And so we see a number of studies and several different cases where meaning at time point A predicted increased risk for dying at time point B. I'm going to go through one here because this also gets us a little bit into remora territory. This is by Patricia Boyle and her colleagues at the Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, USA. And we have two groups. We have our high meaning group, which is sort of like this pyramid shape here, this flag that goes to here. And then behind them is a low meaning group, starting again at the baseline and going all the way up to here. We have a 5-year study. So across here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this cumulative hazard of dying, the hazard ratio for death, over the course of the 5-year study. So what we see, everyone dies. Even if you feel like your life is brimming full of meaning and purpose, the hazard ratio for folks in the highest 10% of purpose in this study, these are older adults. That's another reason they study older adults a lot, is because they have an increased chance of dying. It's grim, but that's why they do it. So there was 11% chance, basically, over a 5-year study of these older adults dying, even if they had lots of meaning. But if you compare that to the people who had low meaning, you had a 57% reduction in the hazard of dying over a 5-year study related to meaning. What would the correlation be if this is the R square? It would be pretty big, right? It would be in the 0.7 something range. So we go from this tiny, almost like you could argue that it's insignificant, the correlation between meaning and health in a snapshot, to this massive impact over and above depression, level of physical disability, neuroticism as a personality factor, number of chronic medical conditions, and income. This is the hazard dying benefit of meaning that emerges. That's pretty massive. It also goes to our goodness remora test, because if I said to you just early on, which is more important whether you live or die, meaning in life, your chronic medical conditions, income, your level of physical disability, whether you're depressed or not, you might have been tempted to say these other things. So meaning shows up in some weird places with some powerful effects over time. But does everyone really want to live forever? Decades-old vampire seducing 17-year-old girl. We've had some very exciting movies come out of Britain lately, but this whole Twilight thing, you can only blame on the United States. Like, the whole tribe of pedophile vampires hang out in high schools, threatening to kill their future girlfriends and saying there's nothing I can do about it. And then romance equals, sure, that's good for me. So I'm sorry, I've got a daughter. This movie makes me want to do that. But he is British, though, right? This guy, the vampire himself, the pedophile. Your undead, immortal pedophile you said to us? Okay. But do you really want to live forever? Is that really the message we're trying to send? Are we supposed to be so frantically afraid of death that we'll prolong it at any cost? Hopefully not. Maybe we can have a better life as well. It's one of the scariest things. Again, I teach a lot of undergraduates. Mostly I teach abnormal psychology. So disorders, despair, sadness, depression, and dementia. And this is the thing when you ask younger people, what are you most afraid of about growing old? They say Alzheimer's disease. So we're going to present some data on Alzheimer's disease. Take on the scary thing, head on. That's what the meaning message is basically. So here we're going to keep the same color coding. These are the lowest purpose people in the study. It's a similar study, similar sample, same research lab. So we're going to be a little cautious about that. And then high meaning. And what we have over time, again, is cumulative hazard of Alzheimer's disease, linked directly to purpose in life. Quite a substantial difference. Again, this one's actually bigger. It's about 3 times, it's about tripling in the hazard rate for Alzheimer's disease.
How are they measuring meaning in these 2 studies?
This is using Carol Riff's purpose in life scale from her psychological well-being.
Okay.
Yeah. So reasonably good, not single item, which those turn out pretty good too. But it ends up not being complicated for people to answer whether they have life meaning. But if you ask someone, makes your life meaningful, then you get a little bit tapped in saying, oh, friends, family. But we can answer whether we have meaning in life or not. What I think is interesting is when we start looking at the structures inside the brain. So Alzheimer's disease develops because of 2 things. The first is these beta amyloid plaques, these clumps. They start to look like steel wool in the spaces between neurons. The second is something called tau proteins that turn into micro neurofibrillary tangles. Typically, tau proteins are providing the architecture for the neurons. Here we're showing, in this case, an axon. And when Alzheimer's disease seems to hit, the tau proteins begin to unravel. So it's like a climbing rope that frays. You have all these strands, and you can see that they tend to tangle around the neuron itself. So with Alzheimer's disease, you have clumps filling up the spaces between neurons, interfering substantially with keeping the health of the neuron alive. The Schwann cells, the glia, all the metabolic processes can't be done. And then individual neurons are being killed because they're just being wrapped up. Like think about the poor sea turtles in a fishing net. The more it struggles almost, the more it tightens. What that looks like on a scan is this. So we see that in some cases there are, these are mostly neurofibrillary tangles. There may be some plaques in there, but this study is focusing on neurofibrillary tangles. And here we have the brain of someone high in meaning and the brain of someone low in meaning. I think you can immediately see what's going on here. They're identical. Okay? So, given the exact same physical manifestations of Alzheimer's disease, the neurofibrillary tangles, the number and density and perfusion within the brain, we're going to see what happens for people with high meaning and low meaning when it comes to cognitive functioning decline. So, again, over a course of a 5-year study, same degree of tangles, high meaning people did have about a 10 to 15% decline in cognitive functioning as assessed with neuropsychological exams, cognitive functioning exams. About 1/3 of the decline in cognitive functioning of someone low in purpose in life. Same physical morphology in the brain, different cognitive and psychological outcomes linked to meaning. So there's a theory out there called cognitive surplus with regard to Alzheimer's. Anyone run into this one before? It says some brains are so full of neurons you can kill off a lot before you notice. That's essentially what it is. It's a little more sophisticated than that, I bet, but that's what I get. So is it possible that we have this two-way street, that meaning helps provide cognitive complexity that gives us, in a sense, some neural surplus, or that it gives us, our current model of the brain is that it's a massively parallel computational device in a sense. So instead of a really powerful transistor, like you get one transistor in your PC, one in your phone, it's just got lots of very weak transistors, but they do things all in parallel. So it could be that the purpose-oriented brain is more parallel, it could be more neuron dense, it could be that neuron dense brains support meaning better. We're not exactly sure, but somehow, over long periods of time, over a lifetime, we start to see massive differences in outcomes later in life, whether it's living longer or living better. Now, if we take a look at some of the other explanations, we see meaning as a stress buffer. This has been supported lots of times. People who have higher sense of meaning have lower psychological reactivity and physiological reactivity when they're stressed out across a lot of markers. Most of the markers that you would measure when you measure stress on the body. So we do know that they are responding less to stress. And stress is toxic over time. And then finally, meaning as a reason. This is really where I think some of the bang for the buck's going to be. We see that people who invest in their lives tend to invest in their health. They do less of all the bad stuff, they do more of all the good stuff, which is what we'd hope. If you care enough to think your life is meaningful, you want to kind of stay alive. You'll keep this little vessel that you're in alive as long as you can. So the overall theory then is that meaning is a health behavior, at least can drive health behavior. And I just like this. I won't spend too much time on this, but this is the scientific and easy way to gain weight from the 1950s. Every person's guide. You can't read it here, but this is like a suggestion for one meal that would generate 2,725 calories for people. It includes all sorts of great things like grape juice, asparagus, calf's liver, lard, ice cream, all sorts of good things. So our ideas about what it means to be healthy might change, but I bet the person whose life was full of meaning could really pack it in back in those days. So that's essentially the argument. And hopefully it makes a compelling cycle, that as people invest in healthy behaviors, they feel like their lives are more meaningful. As they develop meaning and purpose in life, they have more and more architecture to sustain health behaviors on. Unfortunately, I think the converse cycle is possible too. The less and less we invest in healthy behaviors, maybe the less and less link we feel towards meaning and linking meaning and health together. So our job is to try and get people on the healthy side. We've done some studies where we've shown that people do sort of like more virtuous behaviors when they have a high sense of meaning. So these are things like persevering through tough times, writing about goals, and nurturing relationships. And these are bad things, and people who hide meaning do fewer of the bad things. They less often have sex just for pleasure, less often get drunk and hide, masturbate less often, even less often go on long walks just for fun. So something about meaning seems linked to a little bit of more difficult things, and something about meaning seems less attached to more short-term gratification type behaviors. So this is study 2. This is very quick. You'll see it's the scourge of psychology everywhere. Samples of undergraduate students from America. This is study 1 of a long program of research, and we need to get some measurement issues worked out. So that is the one thing. There's one thing that university samples are great for, which is psychometrics, because you need large numbers. The other thing college students are good for, at least in America, is engaging in higher than normal levels of health risk behaviors. So in this one case, I was actually using a reasonably apt sample. So we wanted to understand health risk behaviors and symptoms, particularly sex, drugs, no rock and roll. But we wanted to see if there's a model to create a link between meaning and health, because it doesn't make sense on the face of it. Why should you be healthier if you think your life is more meaningful? So let's say I'm about to have a baby or something crazy example like that. I'm going to become a parent, and everyone tells you this is so meaningful, and then you suddenly realize this profound miracle just happened in your life. Like, oh my God, this is really meaningful. Then you don't sleep for 18 months. Why would that make you healthier? Something has to happen in between. So this is really the argument. And this is the model we're trying to develop, that there's some sort of general health orientation. It's not specific to a disease, it's not specific to a health threat. A lot of the health models, particularly the social cognitive ones, say people only sort of activate psychologically if you tell them you're about to really have terrible health outcomes because of something. You've been eating too much chocolate, you've been not running enough, now you need to get serious. You've been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, now you need to get serious. But what if people are capable of having a general positive orientation towards health? This is what we're calling proactive health orientation. They're proactive about maintaining and chasing down positive health opportunities. We also know everyone, there's the person who says, my grandfather smoked 5 packs of cigarettes every hour and he lived to 122. And so doctors don't know anything. So we also have this health information denial or discounting piece, because there are people who are able to do that. Maybe that's good, but maybe it's better if they just listened to the data. So this is just one model that we ran. We tried to get the measurement pretty decent. You see here that what we're trying to do is run a mediator model, or an indirect effects model, since it's not longitudinal, where proactive health orientation and health information denial are carrying some of the relationship between me and these health outcomes. So these are yes-no health symptoms. I've got stomach problems, I've got headaches, I've got rashes. This is how often people are using substances, and this is how likely someone is to have positive attitudes towards condoms. Very highly related to actual condom use, but not actually condom use. So what you can see here, man, can we ever get out of this 0.1 to 0.3 range? Seemingly not, but what we're seeing is that at least a little bit, we're getting a little bit more information when we try to insert between meaning and these health outcomes, this notion that people are going to either invest in their health or they're going to ignore everything you tell them about what's good and bad for their health. So this is our effort to start to flesh things out. I think in some samples we're going to be a little bit better off. What we still see are these small correlations between being and health, consistent with the literature among general populations. But maybe if we take people who are really at health risk, we're going to see even bigger correlations. So, in the end, what I think is going to happen is people who are strongly driven by me will walk around in body condoms at all times. No, you don't know this movie? The Naked Gun? Is that too old?
Yeah.
Am I too old?
This
is a romantic moment here. You should feel the love. So this isn't exactly what I'm advocating for, but somehow people who have a sense of meaning, I think, are taking better care of themselves over time, and then you have accumulated effects that are protective in later life. So I don't think it's going to be enough to like wave a magic wand and say someone you've got 13% of your brain is affected by neurofibrillary tangles, but guess what? Here's a baby, now your life is more meaningful. Oh, all those tangles are gone, right? That's not going to happen, but I think it's one route for bolstering positive health behaviors along the way. So we can sum up, meaning is good in terms of a psychological variable that predicts outcomes we desire. Meaning is related to better health, and in particular, interestingly, even more strongly to relate to longer life and to better health in some cases. Small effects concurrently, much larger effects longitudinally. Lots of research already, and the research is starting to pick up. So if you're curious about this research, it's a great time to get in. A lot more people are looking for things to cite, and people to learn from. So then when I look back at the sky, I wonder why should I do this? Why should I go jogging? Which I actually haven't jogged on this trip, but I did walk a lot, and I'll just say that's good enough. Why should we do these sorts of things? We get to populate the questions with answers then, if we have a meaning. Because life's great, people care, relieves the burdens for others. I want to excel. I want to meet my grandchildren. I can be a role model with the way I behave. Because I need time to make my contribution to society or the world. Because the world does need some more good people. And finally, because each of you matter. So maybe that is the true link between meaning and health. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions?
I wasn't quite clear about your remora.
Yeah, okay.
So the remora of goodness. Is the fish good? Is the shark good? What's
Yeah, so
it's a harbinger of.
It's a harbinger of something different that we're not measuring in certain studies. So that would be the model where, so there's some research that shows, the economist who did Freakonomics, Stephen Levitt, I think is his name, he did all these studies, and he showed like educational outcome for children is how many books parents have on their shelves, not whether they read them or not. Right? So is it the book that's really driving, if you just throw a bunch of books on your shelf, is that going to make your kids graduate from Oxford or wherever? Probably not. It's a proxy for something else that's not being measured, which is educational values, maybe socioeconomic status of the family, all these sorts of things. So if meaning is just being measured by itself, it can look like a big shark because it's following what the shark does. So there's like bloody chunks of bodies in the sea, but the remora is just following the shark. So in order to really know that, we need to study many of the variables we can in conjunction with each other, so we don't end up calling a little variable, maybe meaning, maybe something else, a shark. Does that kind of make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think meaning's going to be in the school of fish. I don't know if there's a big shark out there, but I think meaning's one of the fish.
Any other questions?
It looks at higher effects come when something tough is going on. So if you look at the snapshot, it's not so strong, but then if you look what happens with older people, with people in concentration camps, with people with cancer, with people with blah, blah, blah. So meaning is also an ingredient in many psychotherapies. How do you think we can improve meaning in the general population? I know it's a lot of psychotherapy tendencies have influence from Frankl and so on. General population, how can we increase meaning?
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring up psychotherapy because the best evidence of procedures that increase meaning are from psychotherapy literature. So right now, the one true way we know to increase meaning for people is to help them engage in psychotherapy. Because meaning seems a little bit long to develop. There's not going to be like a count your 3 blessings intervention probably for meaning, or at least when I've run those over and over again, I found mostly no results and difficult to replicate tiny things. So I think sustainability is the key when it comes to something like meaning. It's not a fleeting emotion. It's not like a mantra. I think it is something that's cultivated over time. So it's more like a practice, more like it's not like exactly mindfulness, but in a sense to teach yourself the idea that you're creating meaning all the time. It happened just now. You can't help it unless you focus on it. So thinking about teaching kids, how do you understand the world? How do you think through issues of values? How do you think through conflicts with other people and identify where those conflicts are coming and think about better outcomes? I think there's like meaning competencies, mostly around finding ways of thinking through abstractions and coming up with purposes that people can feel good about pursuing. But in terms of data, there's very little to suggest any sort of quick fixes. So it's all these sort of longer term investments of time. We're working on it now in the lab. Slow, but we're working on it.
Do you see any correlation between compassion and meaning, self-compassion?
Yeah, there have been studies that have found correlation between self-compassion and meaning. We did a study, it was a daily diary study, if you're familiar with that. Basically, you find your sample and they fill out usually an online diary or a phone-based diary every day, mostly responding to scales, So we did one where we took a look at mindfulness, self-compassion, some of these same sorts of health behaviors, stress and meaning. We found consistent. We haven't done the lag analyses yet because I just had to hurry up and get it done for a poster, and then it was like my grad student's project, but that's going a little slow. We'll get back to it, but we did find intra-individual correlations, intraday correlations between those, as well as on the aggregate level, 2 levels. People who are generally more self-compassionate generally feel life is more meaningful as well. So that's very consistent with the literature.
As psychologists, we construct meaning for people. So firstly, what are the problems with that? And secondly, the meanings that we construct for people might be very white and very Western and maybe capitalist. So what are the other forms of meaning outside of that definition?
So how would people from other cultural backgrounds define the very notion of what meaning in life is as a subjective state, in a sense? There isn't much evidence that there are differences, that there need to be differences so far in how we measure meaning in life. So the same sorts of scales, generally speaking, have worked really well with very isolated occasions where it's not. So like I did this meaning in life questionnaire. It's purportedly been used a few 100,000 times around the world, and it almost always looks to work exactly the same as it did here. So if you're just looking at the meaningometer, the meaning thermometer, people, the whole point of the way that I wanted to measure meaning in life was to allow people to populate meaning with whatever they wanted. So I'm no expert. I'm not going to say you have to have these 3 things from list A and 2 from list B. So there are probably some issues in there that we could go deeper and learn more. I've not seen anything emerging from other cultures. So there's researchers in Hong Kong who have been researching meaning in life for decades, and they haven't come up with anything really different either within just the exercise of measuring meaning, yes or no. In terms of what fills up your meaning bucket, so we would often call those sources of meaning. So it's common in Western studies that relationships are the most commonly cited source of meaning. We'll see goals, we'll see beliefs, sometimes we'll see traditions, things like that populate that. Usually the list is anywhere between 4 to 7 to 9 different categories. It's all this qualitative research, who really knows? No, so there's a lot of consistency across sample, but the method you use there does seem to yield differing numbers. There's a really interesting case. Someone was using a sources of meaning profile, which was originally developed to have four levels or 4 sources of meaning, and then they used it in Israel, and they found that 7 was a better solution, with some unique ones like tranquility that wasn't coming out in Canada, for instance. And so you do see sometimes, even with using the same method, you run into problems and need to sort of expand. The Russian meaning scholar, Dmitry Leontiev, argues that there's at least 23 different experiential, phenomenological encounters with meaning, and I'm not sure exactly if that's sources of meaning or not, but there's, in his worldview, there's even bigger numbers. So in terms of what have we learned about someone's unique life and their cultural rootedness or not from, do you have meaning, yes or no? Probably not very much. So that's really fascinating stuff, but it's very hard to do on a global scale.
Is there much work done in societies where there is conflict, either low intensity or high intensity conflict, in terms of meaning?
Mostly low intensity or sort of static level conflict or baseline level conflict. So as I mentioned, there's quite a bit of research from Israel. Some of it looking at Israeli Arabs, some of it looking at Israeli Jews. There's quite a lot of research coming out of South Africa where there's different kinds of conflict, but some of it was during the apartheid struggle.
Because I think it would be interesting, especially in countries in conflict, because the world global peace index was published today, you know, and a lot of the way.
Did America win?
No, it'd be good to be in Australia. Iceland came top.
Oh, they always do, don't they?
Yeah, UK's 39.
UK's 39?
Yeah, it's quite great. Well, there's about 159, 162 countries in it.
Lots of room for growth.
There is. And peace.
And peace.
So that's what I asked.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. You know, part of the overall mission I have in my back of my mind, but it has to be data driven for me. I'm a positivist, I guess, in the end. But I would like to. I have the hypothesis, so far not refuted, that people who are oriented and motivated by meaning are better citizens, better neighbors, less focused on what I need right now and more focused on what we all might need somewhere down the road. So I'm hopeful that there's a way of going from that individual level basis where meaning-filled people seem to be the type of people that we'd be okay hanging around, to is there such a thing as a meaning-filled organization, neighborhood, society, community, country? Who knows? I hope so. If it's not meaning, it's got to be something else, and I'll study that instead. But yeah, it's a good perspective, right? To get us out of like just this
Last question.
fish-based conversation. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Just wondering your thoughts about how this research could be used, because there is an argument this could be used by governments to regulate populations. I mean, I'm no post-structuralist, but this seems to me the epitome of like Foucault's idea of a diffuse and strategic biopower, the idea that you're linking people's medical conditions to how they find meaning, which is a very subjective phenomenological idea. And even if the correlations are low, is there really thought how a government could use this data and how this data is going to be used when the project's finished?
Yeah, I did get one opportunity to sort of just reel out a alternate fantastical universe where something like this would happen. And I just, it was for a pretty obscure journal, the Ewha University Journal of Social Studies, but I was like, I can't pass up the chance to do this. So it was, what would a meaning-driven public policy look like as opposed to GDP-driven public policy, which is what we have now in almost every major Western country, where the things that contribute to GDP are the things that catch the ears of the policymakers, in a sense. And you can, you even measure death as an impact on GDP. You measure birth as an impact on GDP. You don't measure things that affect other things. And I think you'd see sometimes some divergent agendas. So less so than creating economic growth. You'd want to create lots more economic opportunity. You'd want to create a lot more systems where people can feel easily facilitated in contributing around them, as well as considering ways to contribute elsewhere that wouldn't only be done for tax benefits and so on. So in terms of public policy from the top down, you'd be trying to encourage those sorts of things. You pay a little bit more attention to the psychological development of kids, as opposed to what their test scores are and things like that. But that was just following backwards. I mean, that's not a articulated agenda. It's just like, what would happen if the predictors of meaning found their way into government policy? So what it would really look like, I don't know. I mean, I don't think. Every time I hear like Foucault, I think there's some sort of like nefarious,
I'm not
governmental plan to.
Fan either. It's just like this is exactly what this is. It's almost like if he would make a study about what biopower is, it would be this. That's the reason I bring it up.
But he's so suspicious of like efforts to structuralize some of this stuff, isn't he? I mean, so I might go off on an ill-advised tangent, but I think there's no reason not to do that. Not to at least talk about it. And I think part of the dialogue is important. But whatever we think is important creates cohesion, increases trust, increases peace, increases opportunity, equity. I think those are the things we need to be talking about, and we would never talk about those things. Instead, we talk about whose hat is worth how many £1,000 and all that sort of stuff. So we're all co-creating our society. Am I going to save that question for afterwards?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you can hold on to that. Mike, thank you so much. Last year, seeing you at the keynote of the Canadian Positive Psychology Association conference to coming here at UEL. I know you're a world-renowned speaker. It's amazing to have you here, so thank you so much. To speak twice, but thank you.
Thank you.
Your lab on meaning, they can find find out information on michaelsteger.com, and you've got your publications and papers up
Oh
there.
yeah, well I was gonna say some other thing. We just launched something, if it's possible, try to write meeting at work.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're trying to move into organizational approaches right now, right? So this idea that we can get out of our own my meaning piece. This looks like just a wall, right?
That's
It's
just
just
a
a
wall.
wall.
That's just a wall.
Are you sure? Okay, but we've got, we just launched as part of that ongoing conversation, we launched meetingatwork.org. So meaningful work is sort of an emerging area of interest for me. Because I think it's important to think about how can institutions, organizations, groups of people create more dense opportunities for experiencing meaning. Because I think one person at a time is inefficient and won't work. So this where it's at right now is it's got an assessment battery, really. It's got about 35 items that cover things like meaningful work, including some experimental items, engagement, and then some other little pieces of that. We're just trying to figure out what the data look like right now. Somewhere down the road, I'm working with a couple consultants. So in all honesty, I think we may start offering in a few years some sort of product to help work with organizations. But right now, we're just interested in what the data look like from around the world, because all the data come from Canada and the U.S. And those are really great countries, I'm sure. I don't know much about either one, but we need to really kind of get a picture of what this looks like elsewhere. So if you're willing to take a look at it and fill out a survey, that'd be great. Otherwise, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming.